Today we're talking about a nervous system pattern that happens when silencing yourself feels safer than speaking out or speaking up. So this is a nervous system pattern about self-censorship. And I think it's appropriate to be talking about this right now because there's a lot of censorship going on in the world. And it's my philosophy and belief that the outer world really is just a reflection or a mirror of the aggregate of our internal experience as human beings. And so I think it's a really good time to check in with ourselves and question, like, am I censoring myself? Do I speak up and speak out when I want to? Am I confident in who I am? And do the people in my life know and love me for who I really am? Right? Or am I not speaking up and silencing myself and censoring myself in order to fit in, to feel like I belong, to not get in trouble, right? We're going to talk about where this pattern originates, and this is yet another pattern that I've certainly experienced in my life. It's not the dominant pattern governing my sense of safety, but it certainly was present for me in my life. So some of the symptoms, the signs and symptoms that you might look for if you've never considered that this is something you could have as a nervous system pattern, would be, number one, feeling mild to extreme anxiety anytime you have something to say, but you maybe notice your heart rate starting to increase or your face flushing hot. Maybe you start sweating. Maybe your throat starts closing up, and you allow these bodily cues to stop you from actually saying what was on your mind. And this could happen with a friend, a parent, a boss, on social media. It could show up just about anywhere. Of course, also with an intimate partner, really anywhere that you would feel like you have something to say, and then perhaps whoop, put a lid on it, right? Now, if this pattern for you formed specifically in relationship to, a sex, men or women, growing up, which would be typical of most of us because it's going to be usually a parent and then occasionally siblings or peers, right, as we grow older in school, who have the most influence over whether we self-censor or not. I've noticed that, at least with me and with many of the people that I know that also have this pattern, there's usually, one sex that we're even more censored around, but it could certainly be both. But this would be something to notice in yourself, because maybe you don't consider yourself someone who self-censors because you are able to be yourself around your group of friends. And maybe your group of friends is predominantly men or predominantly women. I don't know. I'm not trying to label anyone here. Just throwing out, again, these signs and symptoms. But for example, I find it a lot easier and actually pretty easy to speak my mind for the most part, but not about all topics, but about maybe more vulnerable personal feelings and such with my female friends. But when it comes to men, I've had a much harder time talking about my feelings and those vulnerable parts of me. However, there's then a switch that happens for me. So this can be kind of a tricky pattern where I actually find it easier to share my thoughts and beliefs about, say, politics or the state of the world or philosophy or science with men. And it's really a lot harder for me to do that with women. So I just find that really interesting. But we can look back to our childhoods typically to figure out maybe why and where these patterns originated. So to wrap up number two, maybe you could look at your life and notice that you feel comfortable in one scenario, but in another, perhaps with men or perhaps with women, it's easier or harder for you to speak up. So I know the best place to look for most of us is going to be intimate partnership. So no matter, what your sexual orientation, I think that this probably would play out. But we tend to get the most triggered and we get the most information about our patterns with our intimate or romantic partners. So I know for me, I had a much harder time speaking up about certain things in my dating life, for example, or in my intimate relationship, because my relationship to my dad when I was growing up was very volatile, where emotions were concerned. And my emotions in particular, if I felt sad or hurt or angry or frustrated, if I felt happy, that was always allowed. So you may notice this pattern showing up in your relationships where you don't feel safe to share how you actually feel to a person of the same sex or the opposite sex. Now, if your pattern was predominantly created through either your mother or your father growing up, then chances are this is going to play out to the extent that in adulthood, you may actually get the bodily nervous system feeling like you're going to die if you speak up. Like your body might actually convince you that if you open your mouth and utter words of vulnerability of any kind to, a man, a woman, depending on who influenced you in this way, that you might die. So this would be another clue, and it's typically going to show up in those romantic partnerships that I just talked about, but it could certainly come up in friendships as well, especially if the friendship really matters to you. Now, the reason you feel like you might die, even though it seems ludicrous, is because in childhood, if, where this pattern was likely created, and you were little, you relied on your parents to provide you with food and shelter and a sense of love and belonging, right? And biologically, it's kind of hardwired into us to belong to a group so that we have safety. And especially when we're little, if we get kicked out of the tribe, like if I'm 10 or 11 or even 12 or 13, and my dad, in my case, was the person who I had the most difficulty sharing feelings with, if he, threatened to banish me, which he actually did with me once, he threatened to send me away to an aunt's house and be rid of me for good. It can leave your nervous system with the belief that if I don't silence myself, if I don't stop speaking up now, I might get banished, and that could mean death. Because biologically, that very well could have meant death at one time, right? Even though logically it's like, okay, if I got sent to my aunt's, she'd probably feed me, wouldn't be the end of the world, right? But our nervous systems are interpreting things with a lot of meaning that we don't even really think at the time. Like, it's not like I had the thought I might die or my aunt might not feed me if I actually get sent there, right? Your nervous system's primary job is to keep you alive. And that's why we have nervous system patterns, right? So in adulthood, this shows up this strongly, in some of us, not everybody. If in childhood you had the experience, maybe once even, or several times, or many times, of biologically feeling like you could face death, starvation, not have shelter, or whatever, if you keep speaking up and speaking out. So then you just learn to silence yourself. Okay, moving on, you may notice that you have opinions and beliefs about things that are not that emotional, but you still don't share them with friends and family when those topics come up. For example, politics. Are you red? Are you blue? Are you green? Are you yellow? Are you purple? Where are you on that spectrum? It can be it can get emotional, right? But it kind of shouldn't be. It's not like talking about hurt feelings and confronting somebody about something they did that hurt you, right? That oftentimes can feel more scary. But if you're used to silencing yourself and censoring yourself, then you may not actually share your feelings with somebody. Now, one of the patterns that I've noticed with me that you may relate to is that I have actually noticed that a lot of my friends or people that I may be creating friendships with or in the process of developing a friendship with, as I'm getting to know them, they will often share with me their beliefs about, let's say President Trump, and they start going off and in a really emotional way. And, I'm listening and I'm present to them. And then they don't ask me if I agree with them. And they just leave it at that, and we kind of move on to the next subject. That's a moment where I don't speak up because I wasn't invited to. They didn't check in with me. And I can understand in that moment that there's an assumption being made that I agree with them. And I think we actually do this a lot. And so maybe you're the person who is doing the talking and you assume other people agree with you. That might be an interesting bit of information about yourself. But I will silence or censor myself in that moment because I don't feel the opening for them actually wanting to know if I agree or not. However, this isn't conducive to people knowing me. So even though it seems like I'm not being invited, I am now challenging myself to speak up in moments like that and not censor myself, because I don't want to be friends with people who assume I agree with them and never ask me, and then if I speak up, don't want to be friends with me. I shouldn't be friends with those people, right? And yet that was a big pattern of mine for a really long time. So if you notice yourself not speaking about your thoughts and feelings when you actually disagree with someone just because they're not inviting you to, right? Even though it's not emotional, this is definitely a sign, in my opinion, that you've learned self-censorship and there's some fear at the nervous system level about speaking out. And building on that a little bit, I would say number 5 would be adapting your personality to fit any scenario. Not everybody's going to fit this sign or symptom, but basically it means you're a chameleon. You mirror other people you're around in order to fit in order to belong, and nobody really knows you because you're so good at mirroring them or mirroring the group. Number 6 would be obedience to authority without even pausing to question whether you agree with what you're being told to think, believe, or do. Now, I would say that we're seeing a lot of this right now. Not just this one, actually. I think if you're, still with me on this and you've been listening to these bullet points or these signs and symptoms, we're seeing all of them right now. I know I am. I've been seeing it in myself. I've had people confide in me that they're not speaking up to friends and family, and it's eating them alive inside because they feel out of integrity, but they're afraid of their family's judgment or their friends, potential abandonment of them or rejection of them. So it's happening all over the place, right? But then I also think this blind obedience to authority without even questioning it is part of this pattern at its root, which is the human nervous system biological belief that group safety is key to survival. Being part of the group and not rocking the boat, right? So it's best to just obey, get along, do what you're told, be a good person, and then we'll all be okay, right? We'll all survive this, and then we can move on with our lives, right? And this is actually true, not just obviously in the time of COVID, but maybe in a family tragedy or a family, it could even be something controversial within a family, right? But you do what you're told, you don't rock the boat, you don't speak up, even though maybe you see things going on that don't feel right to you. But the thought of speaking up and actually causing chaos in the system, in the group system, in the family, in the community, and the friends, it just feels too scary to your nervous system because you've learned that survival is silence. Number 7 is a fear of confronting people about your feelings, in particular when you feel hurt by somebody. So this is a major one because most of us learn to self-censor particularly around our feelings. I mean, this is typically where it happens in childhood. Something happens, you cry, you get angry, you throw a fit, you whatever, and then you're scolded, you're shamed, you're punished, you're told to not cry, you're told, no, you're fine, quit your crying, whatever it is, right? And we learn that our feelings are not okay, are not allowed, basically. and there's no space to process them. So most of the time it is around our feelings. So if you have a hard time confronting people, whether it's a romantic partner who, maybe you have a need that's going unmet, maybe they act a certain way with you that's not okay with you, even though 90% of your relationship is freaking amazing. But there's this intense fear of speaking up. Like, they're going to leave you, they're going to judge you, they're going to abandon you, and maybe they've known you up to now as a person who doesn't actually cause a lot of drama, right? So this is a huge one, but it can show up in other ways too. Maybe you're afraid to confront a boss that is demeaning or somewhat abusive, or maybe you're afraid to ask for a raise. All of these things might indicate self-censorship. And then our final one is kind of one that I'm including because some people have learned self-censorship, but they don't even know they're doing it. So almost all of the signs and symptoms I just listed are probably for people, like if you are one of the people that's identifying with all the previous ones, then you are somebody who you kind of know that you're doing this, right? You're aware that you're not speaking up. You're aware that you have a fear of confrontation. You're aware of all the things. But there's another group of people that I believe have learned to censor themselves so fully that they even censor themselves inwardly. And, so they become the one who threatens or silences internally. And then it becomes habit. So you don't even notice it. But the signs and symptoms of this one are feeling like you don't know who you are. So feeling like you don't have an identity, there's no sense of self. Maybe you feel like you lack purpose in life, but you have no idea what you even want to pursue. So feeling lost at a kind of metaphysical, fundamental level of meaning. So it's basically wrapped up in all of that. If you have, an experience where you just don't even know what you like or what you need, like maybe you're in a relationship with somebody who's like, tell me your needs so I can meet them. And you're like, needs? Mine? Me? I don't know. I don't know what I need. I don't even know what I want out of life, let alone a relationship. Those, would be signs and symptoms that this level of self-censorship is so deep, like you've repressed even your own wants, your own needs, your desires, your instincts, and your impulses at the internal level. So once again, I just want to bring our attention back to the fact that this is getting mirrored in the world. And, I want to look at it as an opportunity. I, find myself getting mad sometimes about the censorship that's happening on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and other places. And yet I believe the pain that this is causing, those of us that are paying attention to this, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to look within and see, where do I censor myself? Where am I not speaking up? Or where do I judge others for speaking up? Or where do I silence people? Where do I shame? Where do I threaten when someone else is speaking up because whatever they have to say threatens my sense of self and my sense of safety at the nervous system level? Because what I see out in the world right now at a really pervasive level of like obviousness, like it's never been so visible to me before, looking out at the world, is all of our nervous system patterns around safety getting triggered, especially around speaking up and speaking out. So I just wanted to bring our attention to that once again, because my whole thing is I'm about freedom. And if you are a slave to your nervous system drivers that are really about survival instead of thriving, then you can't possibly be a fully healthy human being, nor a free human being. And so I'm wanting to teach myself or learn, be a student of this, and then to the best of my ability, teach others how to free ourselves from these drivers so that we can be free thinking beings. We can think for ourselves, we can feel for ourselves, and we can direct our lives out of our own will instead of our will being dictated by these subconscious patterns. So now I want to talk about how to break this pattern if you find yourself identifying with any of the things that I've talked about. So first and foremost, I'm going to be totally real with you. If you want to break this pattern, you're going to have to realize that it was created for a reason. And that reason may still be valid. So for example, in my life, the primary place I learned to self-censor and silence myself was in my family, with my mom, my dad, my brother. Primarily my dad in childhood, and then eventually all of them. And as I began healing my trauma, I began wanting to speak to the things that I had silenced myself about. So I started to break the pattern, and I started to actually speak up. But in speaking up, I encountered the same things that I encountered back then. I was laughed at, I was threatened, I was ridiculed, I was invalidated, my feelings were invalidated by these people that love me. I know they love me, that I love, right? But they're not necessarily on a path of healing. Like, I don't want to speak for them, that's just my observation. And they're not working to break their patterns and become aware of them. And so they, in my opinion, at least at that time, were acting out of their own nervous system patterns of reactivity and being driven by those instead of being driven by freedom. And I was definitely too. I was, feeling rebellious and angry, and I wanted to be heard, right? And I demanded to be heard to some extent. I just refused to be silenced anymore. And when you first start to speak out, you're not going to get it perfect. You may be highly emotional yourself. You may be, it's like you took the bottle cap off of, a big bottle of soda that you'd been shaking for like a decade, and you just took the lid off. That can happen. So I just want to warn you, when I was little, I was threatened, I was laughed at, I was, ridiculed, I was punished, and that happened again in adulthood. So those things that were valid fears, that were the cause of the pattern to begin with, may very well still be here. They might not, I don't know. But it's something to be aware of and something to be prepared for. Because if you are under the impression or the delusion that if you simply start speaking your truth, everyone will love you, then you don't live in the real world. The whole goal here is to love yourself, to speak up and love yourself for being in integrity with you, regardless of what other people say or do when they hear you really speaking and owning your truth and your story and your feelings and your opinions and your beliefs. So I had to include this here because I don't know where you're going to maybe try to break this pattern. It could be with family. It could be with an intimate partner. It could be in your career. It could be starting a YouTube channel where you share your thoughts and opinions on the state of the world. It could be telling friends and family how you actually feel about the mask mandates, no matter what side you're on. Doesn't really matter, right? It's like so contentious either way. But there's something probably in your life right now, some area where you could begin to speak out that if you have this pattern, you're silencing yourself, and you should be prepared for the potential worst case scenario. I'm a huge fan of actually following our fears all the way to the bottom and then getting real about the possibility that that could happen. And so in the case of speaking out, if you're talking, for example, to family who didn't like you speaking your truth when you were little, and they really haven't changed that much, but you have good relationships because you silenced yourself, if you start speaking out, they're gonna like it even less because you changed yourself to adapt to them, to make them comfortable so that you all felt safe. And so if you start speaking out now, right, it's probably gonna rock the boat. I don't know, I'm just saying it's a good idea to prepare for it. Maybe don't be attached to that actually happening, but be prepared for it and be willing to rock some relationships. And honestly, after that first step of acknowledging that the fears that created the nervous system pattern to begin with might still be perfectly valid after you have that realization, all that comes next is practice and it's going to be practiced in different areas of your life. So right now I'm just going to riff on that a little bit for those of you that know your truth and know yourself, but you're just not doing it. And then I'm going to come back and talk to those of you, and I mean those of you that maybe are self-censoring to the extent that you don't even feel like you know who you are. I'm going to give you a different set of practices to break the pattern, because it's definitely going to look different. So if you know your truth, you're just not speaking it, then it's really just going to be, like I said, number one, get okay and realize that some people might not like you speaking your truth, and pick and choose where you speak your truth. That's totally allowed. Just because you don't speak up sometimes doesn't mean you're self-censoring. Like, we get to choose, but choose it out of awareness, not a habitual automated nervous system pattern, right? But you can practice with friends. That's sometimes the easiest place to practice, because it's maybe less likely that we'll get rejected or ridiculed or laughed at or threatened, right? If you do have family members that you feel compelled to confront to be in integrity with you for some healing journey, I don't think it's always necessary, but I know it was for me in certain circumstances with my family, then just know what you're getting into, right? But maybe take some baby steps. Start with something that feels small to you. It's still going to feel big at the nervous system level if this is the first time you're doing it. So within that, it would be, no matter where in life you are speaking up, it's a practice of being okay, feeling like you might die, feeling anxiety, getting okay feeling anxiety, maybe even orienting to anxiety, sweating, your face flushing red, your heart rate increasing, right? Whatever the signs at the body level are for you, maybe getting okay or even excited about those, because it means you're about to get in integrity with yourself. You're about to do something scary, but brave, right? It's brave to be ourselves in a world where, we're told to fit in and be good and do as we're told, right? And not get in trouble. It's brave to speak out when you know someone might not like what you have to hear. So those signs that I just talked about at the body level are clues that you're doing something brave. So if you can orient to that instead of, oh my God, I'm about to do something that might kill me, right? We're just kind of trying to switch the pattern here. And then, like I said, it's just practice and doing it in all the different areas of your life that you possibly can. And if there is an aspect of your profession where you're not doing this, I think that's a huge area for exploration that a lot of us don't pursue. I have a unique opportunity here on YouTube to speak my mind, and it often goes well and it often goes wrong, and I learn from it. So I guess that would be the other kind of separate tip that I would have for everybody is decide to learn from every experience of speaking your truth so that you can do it better next time. But make sure that you're orienting to what you learn for you, not for them, right? So, wow, I learned that when I'm confronting my partner, Stefan, I'm still like, by the way, I'm just totally making this up, and he's going to be editing this, and I'm just making this up. But like, wow, I really learned, like, I went to speak my truth, and I actually edited it to tiptoe around feelings that I thought his feelings might get hurt if I said it the way I really wanted to say it. So even though I'm speaking up, maybe I didn't fully speak my truth in a way that felt good to me, whatever, right? And so I don't actually get to learn if me being fully me would in fact trigger him. And even if it does, can we love each other anyway? Can we find our way to mutual understanding, mutual respect, mutual compassion for the messiness of being human and breaking these patterns, right? So learn from each experience about what it's like for you to speak your truth, what you wish you had done differently for you, and then keep going and keep practicing. So if you are somebody who maybe doesn't feel like you have a sense of self, you're not sure who you are, you're not sure even like what your needs are in relationships, my biggest piece of advice would simply be to begin a practice of observation and self-awareness around what your body is doing in different social circumstances. And those could look a lot of ways. It could even be something as simple as you being alone in your own house, watching a podcast or an interview that has visuals. I would prefer it be probably visual because you're going to get more body language data that way. And notice your body as you're listening to other people speak. You might notice some tension in your throat. You might notice, something rising up. You might notice a judgment of whoever you're listening to. And whatever it is that you notice in yourself, even if it's radical judgment of somebody you're listening to, maybe jealousy, maybe, I don't know, even if it's a so-called negative thing happening, I would allow it, not censor it. Don't censor those things, because those might be the first clues you're going to get about who you are, what you value. Because under every judgment we have of other people is usually either a self-judgment or a value of ours, or it could be even, jealousy presenting as judgment. And so then you get to learn, oh my God, I'm jealous of this podcaster. I want to do a podcast. Oh my God, like I just named something I want, right? And so you just notice first, observe yourself, and then dig in. In other situations, like maybe being around a group of friends or being around family or talking to an intimate partner, notice your body. Notice if you're sweating. Notice if you have anxiety. Notice if your jaw is really tight. Notice if your throat is, kind of closing up. Or maybe your legs are tensing. I don't know. But you're going to notice something in your body, and that's a clue that you can start to follow that will tell you something about you. It could be a fear. It could be a desire. It could be an impulse or an instinct. And I'm not saying you always have to act on those, but this is how you begin the practice, I think, of getting to know yourself in a way that's not heady. Because trying to figure out who you are when you've already silenced yourself is like asking the person who silenced you to tell you who you are. It's going to be a self-defeating process, I think, unless you can come at it kind of from the subconscious body realm. And then you're connecting your head and your heart, your head and your body, and you can put your mind in service of that deeper soul or personality part of yourself. All right, so obviously there's going to be a lot of nuance here. I couldn't possibly cover every sign and symptom of self-censorship, either whichever camp you fell into. But the primary thing I want to leave you with here is the idea of developing a practice of being okay feeling misunderstood, being okay with being judged, being okay feeling rejected, and getting to know some of these deeper fears you have as the reason you self-censored to begin with. We don't, yes, there's that biological I might die thing, but there's also the psychological self-identity sensitive part of us where we don't want who we really are to be judged, to not be allowed, to have feelings, to not be okay, to not be welcomed, right? And then on the flip side, I think each of us longs to be fully seen and fully self-expressed in the world, right? And then welcomed. And we will be by some people. We just won't be by everybody because that's not the world we live in yet. Maybe it will be one day, but right now we're all easily triggered. We all have these nervous system patterns. There's a lot of judgment. There's a lot of do it this way, not that way, and this is the right way, and this is the wrong way, and this is moral, and this is corrupt or evil, right? And so it's going to be impossible to have everybody like you. And so getting okay with some people not liking you and making sure that the first thing you do is love yourself, and then speak your truth so that the people who will love you for you can find you. That's really what this is all about. So I'd love for you to share any takeaways below. I know this is kind of a long one. It feels so pertinent to our times. I got excited to dive into some of the nuance here, but I hope this has served you in some way. And I really want to see more of us speaking our truth in the world, even if we disagree. And then can we actually love each other even in disagreement? Can we see other people who feel differently than we do, who think differently than we do, who want to see the world look differently than we want it to be? And can we, not divide ourselves into all these different camps and become echo chambers? I'd love to see a more inclusive world where we invite other people to share their perspectives, even if it's different than ours. So I honor your truth, whatever it is, even if it's different than mine. I invite you to speak it below, even if it's against some of the things I've had to say on this channel. And with that, I'll just thank you so much for watching this. If you think this would benefit anybody right now through this time period, then please share it. It feels like a really important practice that we each do. And I will see you next time.